September 15th, Derwin Gray.
The void of the absent father is filled by the man who steps up. From his first middle school touchdown to his first day on the AstroTurf as defensive back for the Colts, Derwin Gray never saw his dad in the stands or anywhere in his life. But God sent coaches. I don't want to imagine life without the coaches I had growing up, Gray said. His high school defensive back coach, Mike Sullivan, was most influential in Gray's life. Coach Sullivan pushed Gray to limits he had not known he could reach. This was no easy job. Coach Sullivan worked to develop Gray's character and demanded his best, regardless of the strain it put on their relationship. When Coach Sullivan named Gray team captain, it went to his head a bit, and Gray decided he could skip a practice. So, the next day, when he showed up for a practice, he discovered he had lost his starting position and his chance to play the next several games. Coach Sullivan was more concerned about Gray's character than winning the game. Coach and Gray sat and had the talk. As tears welled up in Coach Sullivan's eyes, he reminded Gray of the greatness Coach had seen in him. Speaking like a father, Coach explained that for Gray to reach his potential as a young man, he had to demand the best of himself every day. The best of himself as a football player and the best of himself as a man of true character. After that hard conversation, something in Gray shifted. He had a new sense of excitement, and not just for football, but for life. He realized Coach Sullivan had seen who Gray could be and was committed to bringing it into existence. At a future game, Gray sat on the sidelines, watching the team from the bench when he heard Coach Sullivan shout, "Dewey, get in!" Gray jumped up and shot onto the field like a rocket, and Coach's call to put him in at that moment carried their team to victory. Gray had learned that team leaders must lead by example and not from an attitude of privilege. That high school team and every team Gray played on afterward counted on him to be an example of commitment, excellence, and character. Gray said, "Coach Sullivan was like a father to me. He saw the greatness that was buried deep down within me, and he called it out of me by challenging me to step up and be a man." Job 29:12 says, "For I, as an honest judge, helped the poor in their need and the fatherless who had no one to help them." Be on the lookout today for someone you can encourage to reach for their best life. The void of the absent father is filled by the man who steps up.
Men, September 15th. Chuck Stecker here with The Chosen Generation and also one of the narrators, very proud to be for 365 Christian Men. You know, the story of Derwin Gray, NFL football player, I grabbed onto that story because it was important to me. I'd had the privilege of meeting him at a small leadership conference that I attended several years ago. He was a speaker there, and sat with him and had a chance to visit with him. You know, here's the part of the story and what leads to the challenge for me. You know, I knew Derwin Gray's name. I knew who he was, and I'd had the privilege of meeting him. I knew of what God was doing in and through him, through the NFL, but I also knew of the church that he pastors and the books that he had written and some of the conversations we'd had in terms of at that conference about the other lives that God was using him to impact. But you know, is the real story here Derwin Gray? Or is the real story here the other football player that spoke to people in the locker room that took 5 years? Don't know who that was. We just know what they called him. Or was the real story here a high school football coach, Mike Sullivan? And I ask you that question, and one of the reasons that this story grabbed me is for the last few years, I've had the privilege of being an assistant football coach for a high school. First as a volunteer, and then I found out last year that I was actually being hired on staff for this high school as the character coach. And that's all I focus on. Character with the coaches, the captains, and with the team. And when I read this story about the importance of the coach there, I thought, isn't it interesting that we focus on this one man, Derwin Gray, as we should. I'm not taking a thing away from his story or what God is doing in and through him. But I began thinking about, I'm not going to be an NFL player. My name will not be known like Derwin Gray's name is known, that's for sure. But here's this. Is God calling me to the role of Michael Sullivan? Coach Mike Sullivan, high school football coach. I don't even know if he was full-time, part-time. I know with the exception of the head football coach at this high school where I serve, the rest of us are part-time. There, we all have full-time positions elsewhere. We show up to do that and give it our best. Is God calling you to pour in to some young men as a Mike Sullivan and trust God with what he could do with that for you? Maybe it's a session on character. Maybe it's to go through a book with them. Maybe it's to invite them into a process and just with some other men. I don't know what the answer is, but here's my challenge. Derwin Gray, if one of you want to play in the NFL, you go for it. But here's what I know. All of us can be Coach Mike Sullivan in the life of someone. That's my challenge today. Who is that person in your life?